No, I'm not a whistler.
I'm not a good whistler. That'll be for after public comment.
Okay. I don't have any on H6.
Oh, you don't have any?
No.
Okay, we'll scratch that then. I'm surprised. I figured you get at least one.
Not on this one. On the other one.
I thought they hit both, but
Yeah. Okay, we're going to call the meeting back to order, please. Okay.
hey, folks, it's going to be a
I'm
long
with-
meeting, so if everyone could please just do their best to quiet down and get to their seats. Thank you all.
I think your voice carries better. I was going to whistle, but I thought that would be rude. Okay, item H6.
Commissioners, in this agenda item, staff is requesting that the board set the fiscal year 2019-2020 proposed millage rates. The agenda attachment that's provided in your package provides the board with the details on the 25 individual taxing districts that Brevard County is the taxing authority over. That's 20 operating and 5 voter-approved debt millages. The aggregate proposed millage rate, which represents all operational millages, is 5.8447% and is a 7.62% decrease from the fiscal year 2018-2019 aggregate rate of 6.3268. The aggregate proposed millage rate of 5.8447 is equal to the aggregate rollback rate. As a result, if the board approves the recommended millage rates under this proposal, according to truth and millage trim requirements established by the state of Florida statutorily, the final budget hearing will not be advertised as a tax increase. In order to support the critical needs outlined in the sheriff's budget proposal, the law enforcement MSTU is being proposed at a rate that exceeds the rate calculated under the county's charter cap and will require a funding of a critical need and a supermajority vote. Critical taxing districts, including the general revenue countywide, mosquito control district, fire control MSTU, and the 7 road and bridge district MSTUs are proposed at a rate that increases ad valorem revenue by 2.44% change in CPI, and that's with the exception of new construction. New construction is not included in that figure. The library and voter-approved parks and recreation taxing districts are proposed at rates which will allow these departments to meet their organizational initiatives, including the employee compensation increase that's proposed in the budget and infrastructure needs by providing revenues that slightly exceed their fiscal year 2018-2019 revenues due to new construction. We received the certified property values from the property appraiser on June 25th, which started the clock ticking on trim requirements. Florida statute requires that within 35 days of the certification of value, which is August 4th, as the taxing authority, we must inform the property appraiser of the following items via completed trim forms: the prior year millage rate, current year proposed millage rate, current year rollback rate, the date, time, and meeting place of the tentative budget hearing. Within 55 days of the certification of value, which on August 24th, the property appraiser is required to mail the trim notice, which notifies taxpayers of the tentative millage rates and also serves as the announcement for the first public hearing in September. The first public hearing will be held on September 12, 2019 at 5:30 p.m. At that meeting, the board will adopt the tentative millages and the tentative budget. Then within 15 days after that tentative budget hearing, the board as the taxing authority will advertise its intent to adopt the final millage and budget. As I previously stated, the tentatively adopted millage rate is equal to or less than the rollback rate as it is proposed. And because of that, the advertisement will be headed notice of budget hearing and will not be a notice of a proposed tax increase. We have scheduled the final budget hearing for September 24th. At this meeting, for each of the 25 taxing districts, we're going to be required to state the percent increase in millage over the rollback rate. The board will be required to adopt the millage rates and the budgets by separate vote, each of the 25 millages, and adopt them by resolutions by announcing each taxing authority, the rollback rate, the percent increase, and the millage rate to be levied. Thank you.
Commissioner Lober?
Seeing as this is not a tax increase, the percent change from the aggregate prior fiscal year is a negative 7.62. I go ahead and move to adopt the proposed millages.
Motion by Commissioner Lober, second by Commissioner Smith. Any further discussion? And I have no cards. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay. Item I. For this item, I have about 20 cards, so I would just ask that we don't interrupt other speakers, and I'm going to try to maintain order in the chambers. I could ask to try to be respectful when someone's speaking. However, I mean, again, it's a First Amendment issue for me, so just please try to be respectful when someone's speaking so they're not interrupted, I would say, as a ground rule. All right, Mr. Philip Stasek, or actually, Commissioner Tobiah, did you want to introduce this item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be pretty brief because I think everyone's read it. And I was going to look at the historical perspective on that, so I went back in a week. On July 16th, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, called the language of the President of the United States racist. Ms. Pelosi's Democratic colleagues, Mr. Hoyer, ultimately ruled Ms. Pelosi out of order based on a passage from Thomas Jefferson's Manual of Parliamentary Practice. Citizens should always feel free to come and speak their mind without fear of retribution or intimidation. This ordinance exclusively focuses on the conduct of elected county commissioners during the meeting and has no impact whatsoever on the First Amendment rights of citizens who wish to speak. The U.S. Congress has rules that create a bare minimum for conduct on the floor. In fact, the U.S. Rule 17 states that members should avoid using personality. Here is my one ask, that this board is no more dysfunctional than Congress. And should we not pass this, we will be. So it's terrible that we have to compare ourselves to Congress, but that's where I'm setting the floor with this, Madam Chair.
Okay. Mr. Stasek, and after Mr. Stasek, John Nyland.
Good morning, Madam Chair and fellow commissioners. I'm Phil Stasek, North Merritt Island, speaking on behalf of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. And I would like to start by saying thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak and to discuss this important issue today.
Oh.
Let's try that. A little more directional, perhaps? I stand in support.
You want to start over, Mr. Stasek?
Sure.
You don't have to restate your name.
No,
it's
it's
Phil
okay.
Stasek with the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. Go ahead.
North Merritt Island, yes,
North
indeed.
Merritt
And I
Island.
do want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning on this important topic. And I thank you, and I really appreciate the fact that this subject is before us today. I stand in support of the ethics and civility guidelines that are proposed. And we strongly believe that they should bind all Brevard County employees at all times, period. If, in the words of Dr. King, I have a dream. I have a dream that the ethics and civility language that we're discussing today can grow a spine and will be stiff and strong to allow it to stand tall. I dream that those words will serve as a foundation upon which a strong ethics office or citizens ethics board will be built. This will be a real ethics watchdog that can take a bite out of misbehavior and prevent corruption at all levels of our county government. Its guidance will be binding and not just words that blow away in the wind. I have a dream that we will reach out to our community for nonpartisan or cross-partisan volunteers to build the structure Volunteers like, well, perhaps a retired Marine Corps Judge Advocate General, perhaps a retired county judge or retired manager from a NASA ethics office, or a retired ethics professional from a local university. At your last meeting, a commissioner said, "I don't like government." Today, I say, let's fix it. Let's fix it together. Brevard County government has a hole that must be fixed. Let's build a county government that we can all be proud of. Our state is a laughingstock, both nationally and internationally. So let's look at the ethics guidance from our state Supreme Court, from military leaders at Patrick Air Force Base and up at the Cape, from the ethics office at the Kennedy Space Center, and HR experts in our aerospace business community. Let's take the best of the best and make it our own. Today is the day to wake from our county's recent collective nightmare. Can we all work together to make this dream a reality? Do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
And if commission has any questions for any of the speakers, we'll wait till after everybody's had a chance to speak, and then if they opt to respond, they're welcome to. John Nyland. After John, we'll have Sandra Sullivan. Hi. Name and address, or name and city.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is John Nyland. I live at 1424 South Riverside Drive in Indialantic. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I'd like to start out by reading the words of a member of this board. Quote, "I am not typically a big abortion proponent, but in Patel's case, I might just be willing to look the other way, as I can only imagine that the scourge on humanity and our economy, her offspring would prove to be that, given her litter, would likely be raised with an entitlement mentality, zero work ethic, and taught the hypocritically racist and sexist position that the white man is evil. Unfortunately, those least capable of properly raising children typically procreate without a second thought, and society is left dealing with the repercussions." Enough of that. I have attended well over 100 of these public meetings in the last 20 years, and never have I heard or read such vulgar and vitriolic language from a sitting member of a governing body. Residents of Brevard County showed up at the July 9th Commissioners' meeting to express their concern, to express their dissent towards these comments. Thomas Jefferson said, "Dissent is the highest form of patriotism." Mr. Lober described those in attendance at the July 9th meeting as a mob. I applaud those in attendance as patriots. Leadership is a privilege to better the lives of others. Don't lose the opportunity to lead morally. In response to the Civility Ordinance, I have some rhetorical questions, and let me continue. Can we clap during a meeting to show our approval of a bill passed by this commission? If so, can we boo in disapproval of a bill passed by this commission? Can I stand at this podium and call the entire Brevard Commission a fake commission? At the July 9th meeting, Mrs. Nardi sat on the dais and called the Florida Today a fake news media. Can I stand at the podium and call the commission a mob that is just trying to bully the residents? Mr. Lober called the residents who were at the last commission meeting a mob that was trying to bully him. The purpose of the ordinance that is in front of you now should be to maintain control and decorum of a public meeting, not to quiet dissent. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Sandra Sullivan, and after Sandra, Melissa Martin.
Sandra Sullivan, South Patrick Shores. I'm an independent. I see the comments on social media, and there's a lot of incivility out there, and there's First Amendment right for people to say what they want. What matters is what happens here in these chambers when people are doing their duties and such. When people attempt to erode the First Amendment, while it may sound really good and seem just reasons at the time, it's a very slippery slope. And I worry about rights being taken away. If you look at today, we don't have privacy compared to what there was when I was growing up. Those rights are pretty much gone. So I caution you about the First Amendment right. And the other thing of more concern I would like to say is that we have so many issues in Brevard County in the infrastructure, in our drinking water, in our environment, and county business. And I would personally like to see, being a non-political person, that county time be dedicated to county business. If people want to have their First Amendment rights and speak at the end of the meeting or the beginning of the meeting, albeit, that's part of the process. But can we please have the county meeting be county business on the agenda? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. After Melissa, Roger Gadgetano, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Good morning, Melissa Martin from COCO. I thought I'd use my time to answer some frequently asked questions about this issue. Question 1, do we need a civility ordinance? Technically, no. The board already has the authority to clarify and enforce the standards of conduct for public officials and their agents. In reality, apparently, yes. What this ordinance does is that it lays out in plain terms that 1, commissioners may not engage in illegal conduct, and 2, you do have the ability to stop it. Question 2, what is this, a political stunt? No. And I only answer this question because this notion appeared to have been coming from 2 of your offices. This is not political, it's not personal, and if you recall from my original citizens request, I had asked that you have your staff look at this issue and report back with your options. I deferred to Ms. Bentley's office and the county manager to help you protect the integrity of county government. And I appreciate Commissioner Tobiah taking bold action on this matter, and I was able to work with him on designing the ordinance to ensure it doesn't infringe on anyone's First Amendment rights. Good government is not a partisan issue. I respect my fellow Americans who are Republicans who have had the moral tenacity to speak up and out about this, either in the public eye or working from behind the scenes. If, however, you'd like me to put on my Democratic Party hat, I would say, please continue to do nothing. It works in our favor. Question 3, back to the ordinance. Does it infringe on the First Amendment rights of commissioners? No. All public officials already have a higher duty of care and responsibility, not only to maintain civility and decorum during public meetings, but to not engage in illegal or unconstitutional conduct. Illegal in the sense that engaging in words or actions that amount to threats, harassment, intimidation, or defamation are already against the law. But even more so when they're used to silence opposing voices. The ordinance is also shaped in a way to tie it directly to the very purpose of the board. You still have plenty of room to, for lack of a better term, drill down on someone if you're serving a legitimate purpose like exposing fraudulent intentions or unethical dealings with that threaten or waste county resources. But for members of the public who come in here to speak their minds or redress grievances, even if they bring points of concern that personally offend you, you may not harm them or their rights. While adopting an ordinance would be great, what really needs to happen is an official declaration of our community standards and an official reprimand against the clear and continuing violation of those standards. Regardless of what you do about the ordinance, I ask that you move to censure. Thank you.
After Roger, Suzanne Valencia.
Good morning, Commissioners. Roger Gadgetano, Turtle Mountain Road, Melbourne. I don't often come before the commissioners. I try to stay out of your business. I try to stay informed, but I stay out. I figure we elected you, and you are more informed about the issues than what I am. So whether I agree or disagree with your votes, normally I stay out of it. This particular issue, I think, affects me. If I have to be expected to be civil when I come here and I'm from the streets of Brooklyn, okay, I don't see why civility can't be maintained on the dais. I don't think that we need a special ordinance or resolution to make that happen. I think Robert's Rules allows for you to slam the gavel down, Ms. Chairperson, and just stop the authorization for someone to speak if you feel that they're out of line. If that's not right, okay, then there has to be another method for you to do it. But to pass a resolution that says you have to be polite, we got a sign at the back of the room. And I can't remember exactly what it says, but it says something to the effect that we will all be civil to one another. You're facing that sign at every meeting. It's to my back. And if I have to be expected to remember that, why can't you? Why do you need a special resolution to do that? That's kind of wasteful. The other point I would like to bring up is just my personal feeling, and I may well have a lot of people that disagree with this, but it's my understanding that 4 out of 5 of you on the board have other full-time careers. I disagree with that. I don't think that that's proper, because no two items can occupy the same space at one time, nor can any one item be in 2 places at the same time. It's not like walking and chewing gum, being up on the dais and being a county commissioner. You can walk and chew gum at the same time simultaneously, but you can't be a plumber and a county commissioner, especially if you expect to be working on the plumbing system inside of a government facility. That becomes really close to a conflict of interest. So if you have another career, it possibly could overlap and be a conflict of interest. But even when it's not, that other career deserves your full-time attention if you're working a full-time career, as does being a county commissioner. And if you work your county commissioner position full-time, how much more could you be getting done rather than handling it part-time? So I would only say, really, to sum up quickly, I don't think we need an ordinance or a resolution as to being civil. I think you just might have to use the gavel a little differently than what it's currently used for. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Suzanne Valencia? And after Suzanne, Karen Colby?
I'm Suzanne Valencia. I live in West Melbourne. And my only comment is a commissioner is a commissioner full-time, all the time, and should reflect the values of the Brevard County Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Karen Colby?
Sorry, I gotta pull it up. Hi, I'm Karen Colby, and I'm from Indian Harbor Beach. There are community leaders who have issues in their own backyard with civility, ethics, integrity, and contamination. They have murky tap water flowing into their own homes, and they're more concerned about censoring our county officials. Why? We need less censorship to have an open dialogue towards solving these serious issues. And what are those serious issues? Drinking water quality, military dumps in South Patrick Shores draining into the river, PFAS contamination, neurotoxins in Lake Washington, PFBA in 13 beachside schools, dying Indian River Lagoon, proposed toxic muck dredging, and dumping that nasty stuff we call dirt on the beach to cover the mid-reach. We could be working together to resolve these issues, but instead we're engaged in some sort of civility war that happened about an event on Facebook outside of a county business atmosphere. I do not agree with the censorship of our public officials. Their time is their time, unless they're breaking the law, which nothing was done to break the law. It's refreshing when the public officials are actually engaged in conversation with us. sort of what the president does when he engages in conversation with us. I hear people snickering behind me. I hope that's on the record. It is part of our rights to be respected no matter what we believe in. You hear that? People from all around the world have different faiths, different religions, different atmospheres of being raised, different ways of looking at things. Your opinion is not going to go away just because we forbid their expression of it. You cannot legislate opinion versus offense. Censorship shuts down the conversation entirely. Some people may say that censorship exists to protect large masses of people from damaging content, but then we are not getting the complete truth. We've seen it. Just because you don't agree with an opinion or message doesn't give you the right to subject our public officials to witch hunts. Character assassination is something very few people can easily endure because they've been threatened at home. Every American has the right to freedom of opinion and freedom of expression. Those rights include freedom to have opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and import information and ideas through any media and regardless of the frontiers. Some people might use censorship to skew the truth or to hide the facts. It's better for all people to know as much as possible. That's how we are able to form our own opinions and ideas. Our county was built around the idea of everyone having a free, unchallenged, uncensored voice. I read that the proposal. I had to ask for it. How many of y'all have actually seen the proposal that we're being discussed about? Why we don't want it because we haven't seen it. We don't need it. You guys do the job the way you're doing, and much of it's offensive and in my opinion is a violation of our rights. Read it. We have Robert's Rules of Order to use in here. What people do outside the rooms can be handled in a court of law. Thank you.
Janice Crisp, and after Janice Crisp, Stacy Patel.
Before I start, can I just make a point? This
Yeah,
ordinance,
if it's on your,
this ordinance was not online in the agenda packet yesterday.
it's online. I have it pulled up online.
After yesterday.
Okay, I got to put you on the clock.
That's fine.
Okay.
Hello again, and thank you for allowing us to speak to this issue. My name is Janice Crisp, and I'm from Palm Bay. At first glance, this order may seem harmless and like it is imposing good manners, but I would like to draw attention to the rules of decorum under Section 230. If anybody has actually the ordinance they can look at. I had to call and ask yesterday for it late in the afternoon, and it was emailed to me. That ordinance says under A1, the members of the board shall not make statements intended to intimidate, threaten, defame a member of the public, or chill their speech if it serves no legitimate purpose. Under 1, it says the intent includes, but is not limited to, attacking the personal character of any individual, including but not limited to calling into question their integrity unless they're convicted of a crime. Labeling another individual pejoratively. Let's define this word. Pejoratively, a word or phrase that has a negative connotation or that is intended to disparage. In a manner that does not directly relate to county business at hand, especially when done in retaliation to the viewpoints or content of a speaker's comments. Number 2, legitimate public purpose is defined to include issues of public concern, which is those listed on meeting agendas, ethics, fraud, waste, or abuse, authority, or government resources. First, let's keep in mind that the current Supreme Court ruling is that the First Amendment prevents government from punishing speech and expressive conduct because it disapproves of the ideas expressed. So any individual like myself, we can come up here and we can we can speak pejoratively, and we are covered under the First Amendment. Therefore, but an elected official, they have a couple special rules. Believe it or not, there are rules for that. I have to kind of skip down. The rules that are set out by the 2006 Garcetti versus Cabela's case gives a test to determine if speech and expression is protected. I can tell you up front, the test is nowhere to be found in this ordinance, and it has nothing to do with what the Congress that is in session right now does. It would seem to me that if you did try to censor or reprimand or punish a member, you would have a lawsuit for these reasons alone. Courts currently employ a three-part test to determine whether the government's employee's speech is protected. First of all, the government employees are only protected by the First Amendment when they are speaking as private citizens.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I would encourage you, Mr. Tobiah, to read
Miss
what the
Stacy
law is.
Patel, and after Stacy Patel, Sanjay Patel.
I'm Stacy Patel from Satellite Beach. Today, this commission will make an important decision. Will you protect the constitutional right of the people of Brevard to petition our government for the redress of grievances? Will you defend the First Amendment by standing firmly against government retaliation for acts of free speech? Will you demonstrate the leadership our community needs to rise above divisiveness and cultivate civility and mutual respect? Will you stand with the majority of your constituents who believe that decency, decorum, and our constitutional rights ought to be nonpartisan and non-negotiable? Or will this commission instead place partisanship before principle? Will you, through silence or inaction, implicitly adopt incivility and government retaliation against the public's First Amendment rights as conservative policy in our community? Commissioner Lober's actions have clearly chilled civic participation and free speech in our community. He's threatened livelihoods and lawsuits, made comments the Anti-Defamation League of Florida said could be taken to green light violence, and issued vicious public insults against local residents who dare to dissent. A District 2 resident who attended the last commission meeting was too scared to speak up because she feared Commissioner Lober might make it difficult for her to access county services. Another District 2 voter wrote, "I'm simply trying to understand why he's allowed to continue. I don't feel confident to show up at these meetings." Given the commission's silence and inaction over the past few months, I have to wonder if you too might be scared of Commissioner Lober's retaliation. As Commissioner Smith said, he has a very short fuse. Is fear of retaliation the reason you failed to act on so many calls for censure? I'm asking for your moral courage to protect our community. As we face the peril of political polarization, I'd ask this commission to rise above the fray and offer the kind of leadership that can hold our community together by celebrating our differences and adamantly refusing retaliation against those who express dissent, both inside and outside these chambers. The proposed civility ordinance is one small, necessary step, but it is by no means sufficient. It still ultimately depends on your moral courage to vote for censure or to petition the governor. But perhaps it could be used to protect the public from being called, as we were at the last meeting, naive, dishonest, gullible, a mob, hateful, bigot, liar, racist, sexist, professional agitators, and asses on the record from the dais. So I guess that's a start. But what about what goes on outside this chamber? The vitriolic diatribes against those who request public records, the thoughtless comments the Anti-Defamation League said could be taken to greenlight violence, the remarks about the abortion of my future children or referring to them as a scourge on humanity that somehow makes its way to the national press. What of the threats against the livelihood of someone who dares to dissent with a public official online? This ordinance doesn't even begin to address the root of the problem, but you can. Please take clear, decisive action today to restore civility on this commission and to protect the public from further government retaliation for free speech.
Sanjay? And after Sanjay, Peter Fuscus?
My name is Sanjay Patel, and I live in Satellite Beach. For months now, we've had an objectively bad actor on this dais, a commissioner lacking basic skills in decency and decorum, an individual incapable of acknowledging his shortcomings, and when his behavior catches national attention, deflects blame to the individuals who have borne the brunt of his cruelty. And instead of taking immediate and decisive action, the rest of the commissioners have looked the other way. When your preteen gets on Snapchat and acts a fool online, we all hope an adult steps in to reprimand the child and probably take the phone away. Unfortunately, the preteen here happens to be an elected official, and it looks like the adults have left the room. I commend Melissa Martin for stepping up and saying, let's do something. The reality is, it shouldn't have had to come to this. You've all had ample opportunity from early March when we first addressed his abhorrent comments online and retaliation on private citizens' employment to mid-May when he eroded the public trust by taking on the chair's husband as a client. All any one of you four had to do was say publicly, that is not right, that is not how we conduct ourselves, and move to censure him in hopes that he learns a lesson. This ordinance is a good first step, but make no mistake, the most egregious behavior has happened outside of the confines of this chamber and has still not been addressed. Commissioner Lober claims we're attacking his right to free speech, but the First Amendment exists to protect the public from the actions of the government. Free speech is the right to criticize your public officials and not lose your employment or fear them unleashing their minions to do harm to you or your family. The only individual attacking anyone's right to free speech is Commissioner Lober. When I think of your role as county commissioners, you've got a really hard job. Here's an endless list of needs and issues and a limited pot of resources to address them. Your job is to tackle hard problems and find solutions that benefit the majority of the community. I urge you to tackle head-on the problem that is your District 2 Commissioner's behavior so that we can all move forward together on those issues that will require us all to solve them. One more item. Since Commissioner Lober so often clamors for context, I want to offer some context that he conveniently left out in explaining his snowplow remarks in the last meeting. As he mentioned, before his comment, someone wrote, "Word of wisdom to the protesters, beware the Dodge Chargers." He left out the words of the second commenter who wrote, "If you hit one, back up and go again." Just kidding. It is to this comment that Commissioner Lober directly responded, "I wouldn't recommend using a snowplow. It might look intentional." I'll leave you to interpret his so-called joke. Finally, I wanted to give a warm welcome to John Tobiah, who former Cocoa Mayor Henry Parrish has deemed no better than a radical socialist Democrat. John, if you're interested in joining the team, I'll hand you a slip of paper after the meeting to give you a list of our meetings and to teach you the secret handshake.
And I apologize in advance, and I didn't do it before. If I mispronounce anybody's name, it's not intentional. After Peter Fuskus, Adam Tritt.
Peter Fuskus, Malabar. I'd like to quote from Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedure. Rules should be applied with judgment and fairness. Inflexible rules that are rigorously applied to differing situations often produce injustice. In a civility ordinance, we need to be mindful that we do not trample on anyone's right of free speech. We can't or shouldn't overregulate a deliberative body. I concur with an editorial by Florida Today. A civility policy is great, but we shouldn't need one in Brevard County. While I join Florida Today in applauding the efforts of Commissioner John Tobiah and Attorney Melissa Martin for drafting a civility ordinance, I would like to point out that we already have a civility ordinance. We simply need to enforce it. The ordinance already established provides that Robert's Rules of Order is to be used in conducting its legislative meetings. Chapter 7, Section 43, Chapter 20, Section 61 of Robert's Rules of Order, 11th edition, addresses decorum and debate and disciplinary procedures. These rules address the concerns expressed by Commissioner John Tobiah, Attorney Melissa Martin, Florida Today, and me. Accordingly, the Board of County Commissioners has been given the parliamentary authority and guidance under Robert's Rules to address the issues of civility and decorum. By maintaining order under Robert's Rules, your debates, your hearings, your workshops, you can eliminate rancorous behavior, insults and obscenities, personal attacks. You can avoid delays and avoid disruptions. Robert's Rules is intended to give everyone who is patiently waiting an opportunity to exercise their constitutional rights to express their opinions and voice their objections. Inside this legislative body, the elected official can be, any elected official can be censured or disciplined under Robert's Rules. Of course, proper procedures need to be followed, and an affirmative vote needs to be taken. The rules herein, however, have no jurisdiction outside this deliberative body. Outside, free speech rules supreme. The people's remedy for abusive behavior outside this legislative body rests in the courts on claims of libel or slander, or at the ballot box. You cannot shut down free speech no matter how much you dislike what has been said. In summary, the county already has the tools and rules to establish and maintain order if they choose to exercise that authority.
Okay, I gotta cut you off. I'm sorry. Adam Tritt, and after Adam, Elizabeth Michelman? Michelman. Thank you.
Good morning, Adam Tritt, Melbourne. The concept that freedom does not mean license is firmly established in our culture and our law. The idea that rights come with responsibilities is also firmly established. So much so that over 250 years ago, our own founding father, George Washington, wrote a book called Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior, because he saw similar difficulties as what we are seeing today. And as Commissioner Tobiah pointed out, we also have Thomas Jefferson who spoke about these issues. Unfortunately, this is nothing new for this commission, so I'm not talking about a particular commissioner today. I would like to make sure this doesn't happen in the future, as it has in the past. This commission has had a difficulty over the past 30 years, if we look at the history of this commission, of attacking the public and chilling public commentary. My own children have been victim of this. I'd like to see this stop. Since Robert's Rules of Orders have not been effective in doing so, since the other commissioners have not been effective in doing so, I applaud Commissioner Tobiah and Melissa Martin for stepping up to make this happen. We understand there is a difference between free speech and hate speech. This is why we have hate speech laws. It has long been the habit of people who want to say something inflammatory. They know is inflammatory, they know will be harmful, to step forward, say it, and step back and say, oh no, free speech. This is the habit of many people, many groups in this country who wish to cause difficulties, who wish to spew hate, spew vitriol, and then hide under the American flag and our Constitution. Do not let that happen on this dais. I'm a teacher. I am held to a much higher standard than our normal population. What I say, what I publish, what I put on the internet. I assume that the commissioners are stating that they are held to a less high standard than I am. I don't particularly think that is right. I don't think that is fair. I am for this proposal. I thank you for putting it forward, and I sincerely hope you're going to vote for it today.
Thank you. Elizabeth Michelman, and after Elizabeth, Robert Burns.
Good morning. I'm Elizabeth Michelman. I'm Merritt Island. I'm really starting to get annoyed that I have to come to these meetings. I'm just going to keep it really simple. I woke up today, and this is what I woke up to, and it is un-American filth. Hear that. Un-American filth. This is the newest thing that's out there. No, it's not in here, but it's out there, and it impacts and affects all of us. I'm upset. I'm really, really hurt. I'm first-generation American. What my family gave up to come to this country was a lot. Sacrifices I don't think anybody in this room can really understand. I brought something. My father worked real hard. He wasn't a pig farmer in Europe. He had to leave a really good life to pursue a better life here in this country. And he did so. He did very, very well. And I kept this. It's actually a document that he was given, and it was part of the Statue of Liberty. It is something that was given from the Ellis Island Centennial Commission for his good works and the fact that his name is on that document, which will be protected in perpetuity. And it's a reminder, maybe to all of us in here, that when we talk about free speech, there is, as Mr. Tripp mentioned, free speech and hate speech. And I think personally we've gone over that line. Un-American filth for daring to express a different opinion. But I'd like to finish with this, maybe a reminder to all of us that your free speech and my free speech have a right to exist as long as they do no harm, whether in this office or out of this office or this meeting room. The Statue of Liberty will be saved, restored, and preserved so that future generations throughout the world will see the symbol of liberty's light burning brightly. Thank you. Please don't have me come here again. I am very uncomfortable being on this podium. Thank you.
After Robert Burns, Judy Coons.
Robert Burns, Viera, Florida. I feel compelled to respond to two of the public comments I heard this morning. One is there's no character assassination going on here. There's character suicide going on. The other one is that you may come up here and use colorful language when addressing the chambers, but these voices here have no color. There are no black voices, white voices, red voices, blue voices. We are all American voices. And I find it abhorrent that someone would come up here and suggest otherwise. I'm an American. I saw the comments that Commissioner Lober made on Facebook this morning, claiming that we are un-American filth. And he can call me filth if he wants to, but what he can't do is call me un-American. I'm an American, I'm a citizen, I'm a retired veteran, so is Melissa Martin. So the filth is subjective, but the American certainly is not. What I've heard a lot is that we don't need this ordinance. We don't need a civility pledge on the back wall, but because people are uncivil, someone felt compelled to put it up there. We don't need to have sheriff deputies in these chambers, but because people don't adhere to the civility pledge, someone felt the need to put sheriff deputies in here to help maintain civility on their overtime, which is something we'll address, I guess, in the next agenda item. But these ordinances aren't there because we need them. They're there to hold people accountable for their actions. We certainly don't need to have laws against people driving under the influence of alcohol. That should go without saying that if you can't walk, you certainly shouldn't be operating a vehicle on the highway, but we do because people do continue to do that and cause harm. Commissioner Lober has continued to cause harm to the citizens here. He talks about his constituents. We are all his constituents. He serves more than just the District 2 commissioner. He serves on the boards throughout this county, and he votes on the matters that affect all of us. We are all his constituents. The laws that regulate him for being subject to removal don't have to happen within this chamber. He doesn't have to commit a felony inside this chamber to be subject to removal. So the behavior that he does outside of this chamber has always been able to be addressed in this chamber. Thank you.
Judy, and after Judy Coons, Matt and I.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Judy Coons. I want to thank the Commissioners.
Address or city?
Oh, I'm sorry, Cocoa Beach, Florida. I'd like to thank the Commission for this opportunity to address this very important issue. I am an attorney in the state of Florida and have been for over 40 years. I'm also a graduate of the University of Florida College of Law and a graduate of Harvard Divinity School as well. During the last 20 years, I have served as a law professor, and among the courses that I taught were Florida constitutional law, as well as professional responsibility. And of course, I am a graduate of Cocoa Beach High School. Civility Ordinance. I'd like to address 3 important points. First of all, why we need this Civility Ordinance. It is necessary to restore trust in our county commission, plain and simple. People have lost trust in what our government is doing. Other processes have not worked, and so it calls us to this end to take this step of adopting this ordinance. When local officials use their position to intimidate, bully, and engage in retaliatory speech and conduct, that is definitely a problem, and that shakes the trust in our government. And the consequences of distrust in government is dire. Second, civility is a nonpartisan, pan-partisan issue. The floor of civility is essential to all speech, red, blue, green, and all other stripes. Bullying, retaliation, intimidating speech of public officials chills the speech of members of the public of all political stripes. And this ordinance, fortunately, points the way out of the partisan mess that we have become embroiled in. It assists and supports the discussion that is so direly needed on the important issues that have come before the board, many of which I have heard earlier this morning. And third, First Amendment. Some key points here. First of all, there's levels of protection of speech. The purest speech is the political speech of the people in this room. Elected officials are clearly called to a higher standard. Any argument that an elected official has a First Amendment right to engage in bullying, intimidating, and retaliatory speech that chills the political speech of constituents is fundamentally flawed. There is no silver bullet of immunity for public officials that chills political speech. People are afraid to speak. They're afraid of retaliation, humiliation. They're afraid of personal injury to themselves or their family, because some speech of an elected official has really raised those issues. So I encourage you to support this ordinance. Thank you.
After Matt and I, we have Bob White. Go ahead.
Good morning, Commissioners. Matt Nye from Suntree. Appreciate the opportunity to be heard this morning. Hope my comments today serve a legitimate purpose. I also hope to honor the spirit of the topic we are discussing, and I shall strive to make my points in a polite and civil fashion. Before I begin, I have to tell you, though, I feel like I'm living in Bizarro world. You guys remember Superman, right? Truth, justice, and the American way. One of his archenemies was Bizarro Superman. Remember that? And now you're all asking, what does Superman have to do with the Civility Ordinance? Well, I'll tell you. Back in November of 2017, I wrote a post on my blog at mattandI.com with the following headline: Commissioner Smith seeks to shut down Commissioner Tobiah, free speech at commission meetings. The post went on to say, the proposed ordinance appears to be a result of perceived personal slights on the part of Commissioner Smith after Commissioner Tobiah questioned some of his travel expenses and acted in a manner that Smith deemed to be, quote, a discredit to the commission, unquote. To his credit, Commissioner Smith had the good sense to pull the ordinance from the agenda, and it was never spoken of again, until a couple of weeks ago. Fast forward to today, and we have the target of the previous ordinance, Commissioner Tobiah, putting forth a similar proposal. This is what I mean by bizarro world. Yesterday's free speech advocate is today's censor, or if you prefer storybook terms, pot, meet, kettle. On the subject of hypocrisy, I don't remember the outrage from the left when then Commissioner Fisher bullied Commissioner Infantini and members of the public on a regular basis. This ordinance appears to be designed to placate the victims we heard from earlier, and muzzle future commissioners from being able to speak their minds and defend themselves against allegations or comments made by members of the public. What I find most interesting, however, is the ordinance doesn't address comments made outside commission meetings, which, as I understand it, were the catalyst for most of this in the first place. Worse, while presumably trying to control the behavior of a current sitting commissioner, the ordinance imposes an undue burden on future commissioners. In typical government fashion, we have a solution in search of a problem, and in this case, the solution doesn't even address the problem. In point of fact, it creates a new one. The threat of having a supermajority of your fellow commissioners voting to ask the governor to suspend you if they don't like what you say or how you say it is sure to have a chilling effect on board discussions and will certainly prevent future commissioners from speaking their mind in the heat of the moment for fear of running afoul of the proposed ordinance. The answer here seems simple. If the members of this board truly believe Commissioner Lober crossed a line, they should take a symbolic vote to censure him and condemn his behavior. I don't condone Commissioner Lober's comments on social media, and I can honestly say it would never occur to me to say such a thing about another person. But I absolutely and unequivocally believe in his right to say something in such poor taste, even as a sitting county commissioner. If he wants to commit political suicide on social media or in a public meeting, it's his God-given American right to do so. The taxpayers of Brevard expect their elected officials to act in a reasonable and respectful fashion. And when elected officials don't live up to that standard, they'll face the consequences in the next election cycle. This is the way our system of government was intended to work, and I hope this commission will continue to allow it to do so. Thank you.
After Bob White, we have Robert Chapman, or Bob Chapman.
Good morning, Commissioners. Bob White from Suntree, Florida. I'll be brief because both Matt and I and Peter Fuskus made several of the points that I was planning to make. I'm speaking on behalf of the Republican Liberty Caucus. I'd like you to know that I represent that organization. We are opposed to the adoption of the Civility Ordinance for the primary reason that it is absolutely not necessary. I mean, even Mel Martin, who is one of the principals behind the establishment of it, acknowledged that fact in her opening remarks. It is technically not necessary. It's effectively not necessary. Peter made the point that you already have the tool that you need through Robert's Rules of Order in order to be able to go ahead and prevent this kind of incivility from taking place. So as advocates for limited government, it ought to be obvious that our organization is never going to advocate for something unnecessary. That government that governs best is the government that governs least. So here we've all been taking all of this time to debate whether or not we should adopt an ordinance that is absolutely unnecessary. So a lot of this meeting has been devoted to literally useless time. So again, I advocate on behalf of the organization that you do not adopt this ordinance. It is absolutely a slippery slope. You can say that, that it won't necessarily lead to further infringements on free speech, but it doesn't affect the way that we address the commission, but who's to say that once you've adopted a civility ordinance that if this commission or any other group of commissioners somehow in the future feels as if they're being threatened or assaulted from the podium by members of the public, that you won't extend that ordinance to the behavior of the people, the taxpayers that come to address you. So I'll conclude with that. Don't adopt this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Chapman, and after Robert Chapman, Carolyn Howell. Hi,
Yeah, fixing to give it to you.
Go ahead.
I'm Robert Chapman. I'm from South Melbourne. I'm from so far south of Melbourne that Palm Bay High is north of me. I'm a Vietnam vet. My uncle was a Korean vet. My father was a WW2 vet. My great-grandfather was a War of 1812 vet, came here to help create Florida when it was a territory. I'm here to talk about this progressive agenda to eliminate our First Amendment right. Being that I know and have lived the history of Vietnam, Korea, I know that out of these conflicts came modern progressives. They are the ones that coordinated with Soviet-style communists to defeat our nation in Vietnam from within us. our nation. Now, years later, progressives have gained full control of one of our political parties and is trying to destroy our Constitution, starting with the First Amendment along with the Second. I'm here to inform the County Commission that if any member aids these Antifa progressives, Antifa means anti-First Amendment, to gain any advantage in stifling the First Amendment, the patriots of this county will work hard to primary said commissioner. I also agree that there are avenues already there that can take care of any commissioner that's out of line. There's recall petition that's available. There's also primarying said individual if the party that individual belongs to decides to primary him. Thank you.
Thank you. After Carolyn, Pamela Castellana. Thanks.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Carolyn Howell of Melbourne. I'm here to urge the Commission to adopt the proposed Code of Civility. You represent all of the citizens of Brevard County. The manner in which you conduct business should recognize the value of citizen participation in government all the time and set an example for the reasonable resolution of disagreements. The adoption of this civility code should also improve the efficiency of commission meetings. I would further urge that the commission extend its civility code to social media. At the last meeting, Madam Chair, you mentioned that one couldn't control social media outside work hours. Yet we have seen and read of numerous examples of educators, police officers, government employees, and elected officials who have been reprimanded, suspended, or even fired when their inflammatory and biased posts have revealed that they would not be able to perform their duties. It is not unreasonable to ask that public officials exercise their First Amendment rights in a civil manner rather than with crudeness, vulgarity, and intimidation. Thank you.
After Pamela Castellana, Matt Fleming.
Good morning. Thank you for making the choice to serve
Can you give us?
Oh, Pamela Castellana from Melbourne, Florida.
Thanks.
And thank you for your choice to serve our community. I know it's not an easy task, and I appreciate it. I especially want to thank Commissioner Smith, who's my personal commissioner, who's been very accessible to me, and Commissioner Tobiah for bringing this issue to the forefront. So the County Commission vision statement includes the following goal: creating cooperative partnerships between government, business, community organizations, and our residents. Our core values are honesty, openness, leadership, quality, accountability, and innovation. That's the mission statement according to your website. I've seen comments from a non-elected county commissioner employee, the community affairs director of one of our commissioners, and I quote, "This is about today's comments. This is about radical progressive politics and Antifa-life type movement of disrupting the business of the people in the media and from the floor of our commission. This is about going after 5 Republicans and sour grapes about Dems losing elections," end quote. This comment is from the same person, of course, who publicly disparaged my career choice as an independent contractor. This is not a partisan issue. If it were, you'd be seeing this kind of vitriolic attacks from every one of the Republican-elected county commissioners. If it were, you'd have seen Brevard Dems addressing every commissioner for their personal comments. Our current leadership team of the Brevard County Democrats has been in place for more than 2 years, yet these concerns were not brought to surface until Commissioner Lober's election. It is about one commissioner and his words and actions. Commissioner Lober once told me that he went into the legal profession because he, and I quote, "enjoys eviscerating people," end quote, whom he considers bad actors. How has any of this creating cooperative partnerships between government and community organizations and our residents. The First Amendment provides protections for citizens to address their government. I have ancestors who fought in the American Revolution to create the First Amendment right for citizens to approach their government. The obvious attempt to squelch any dissent through fear does exactly the opposite. It's unfortunate that we need the civility clause, but apparently we do. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt Fleming, and after Matt Fleming, Mary Jane Nail.
My name is Matt Fleming, Satellite Beach. I think the civility ordinance is a good thing because it has teeth. It creates accountability for incivility coming from the county commission, who today is Republican and likely in the future will be Democrat. It protects the public from them. So I'm having a hard time sort of deciphering the fundamental understanding that we are protecting someone's free speech when they are using their position in government and that speech to intimidate the public. And I have a personal example I'd like to share. On May 21st, online in a public forum, Commissioner Lober said to me, "Matt Fleming, if you had a pot to piss in, or if you had a pot to piss in, I would sue you in a heartbeat." So my question, and it was in the context of what happened in the meeting that day. My question is, do you intend to sue me, Commissioner Lober?
Okay, we can't, no, we're not going back and forth. You make your comments
Chair,
and then.
I apologize. Will
okay.
you ask Commissioner Lober if he intends to sue me?
But we don't do back and forth dialogue during public comments because it often digresses quickly, so we give you your time. So feel free to use the rest of your time if you like.
I would like that question answered, and what is the process to do that? Is that to ask you, as
No.
the chair, to address Commissioner
We
Lober?
I can ask Mr. Lober after public comments are finished if you like.
That's my
and
question.
he can choose to answer.
I have several pots to piss in. Do you intend to sue me?
Okay, Mary Jane Nail. And after Mary Jane, we have Sheriff Wayne Ivey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am for the First Amendment.
Could you state your name and?
Oh, yes, certainly. Mary Jane Nail, Cocoa Beach.
Great. Go ahead.
Thank you. I am for the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Constitution of the United States of America, the flag, God, all of those wonderful things that used to be okay in America. But you know, there's been a change. There's been a change in the public discourse. There's been a change in the elected official discourse. And it isn't very nice. I will tell you that I listen to a lot of Democrats that are in this room, a lot of them. And you know what? I don't agree with a lot of them. But I do believe that I should sacrifice my life for their right to express their opinion, whatever it is. I have to confess that I'm not sure how many years ago it was, but I ran against John Tobiah. Remember John? Anyway, and then I regretted ever having done that because John seemed to come around and be more, what would you say, more flag, American pie, and all of that kind of thing. So I told John, I said, I love you, John. John, I don't love this. I don't love this particular motion that you've put before the commission. I totally disagree with it. I want public opinions to be stated. I want you all to be able to state your public opinions. And I think it would be very interesting if we started, if we're going to do this righteous, I have no sin type of movement, then the first place that this has to be instituted is with the U.S. Congress. Let's start there. Let's make them perfect. Let's clean up their language. I don't want to clean up their language. Let them talk. Let them hang themselves. If John has hung himself, so be it. But I am totally opposed to this motion, this agenda item, and I respect everybody's opinion on the commission. I respect everybody's opinion in the audience, and I just want it to stay that way. Keep on keeping on, folks. Say whatever it is that you want to say. I'll defend it. Your right to say it. But then guess what? I would like for you to defend my right to say what I say also. Thank you.
Sheriff? I was going to tell you to hustle, but I don't want to be rude.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, Sheriff Wayne Ivey from Mims, Florida, and I don't even know how to follow that, other than to say I love all of you guys up there. So John, I love you too, buddy. But my presence here this morning is not for the purpose of engaging in what has or has not been said, but instead is for the purpose of sharing my inherent belief that our Constitution was written to protect all of us, regardless of what role we play in society. As to the issue before you today, I ask you to consider how far we as a society are willing to go to question the intent of what I believe is the most important document in the history of our country, our Constitution. Are we willing to start questioning the four corners of that document and what the intent was? Because if we are, where does that stop? Does it extend to the Second Amendment, which none of us in this room would tolerate? Or perhaps the Fourth Amendment, about what they actually meant when they crafted it in regards to search and seizure? What if we started questioning if people really have the right to remain silent and plead the Fifth when accused of a crime? Agreeably, none of us would stand for those vital parts of our Constitution to be infringed upon. So I believe we must be extremely cautious in considering the matter before you today. While I will leave the legal views to our county attorney as to the constitutionality of this ordinance, I personally have great concern over an ordinance or rule that attempts to take away or even stymie someone's ability to freely express their opinion. Granted, there are exceptions to freedom of speech. For example, you can't yell fire in a theater, you can't talk about bombing a plane or a school, and you can't make threats against others. But I am personally unaware of any restriction that stops people from expressing their opinions. If there is such a restriction, then please enlighten me, as I have a few people who have called me fat since I was elected sheriff, and one more person that sent me an email that said I need to eat more salads. The other component of this that concerns me is who will sit in judgment of these potential violations and determine that the remarks made were uncivil or in violation of the ordinance. In fact, who is the exact person that says those comments violate the standard of conduct? If that person or persons is to be our commissioners, are we now asking them to preside as jurors in that case as well? I mean, are we really asking our commissioners to now sit as judge, jury, and executioners? Our commissioners were elected to solve problems and run our government, not sit in judgment over the actions of one of their fellow commissioners who may or may not have said something wrong. Imagine the amount of your time as a commission that will be required to hear the accusations against someone and then vote to censure the defendant. In my opinion, that time could be best focused on solving other problems that require immediate attention as we strive to make our community the best. I promise you that not one single person who is thinking about moving here or building their business here is currently Google searching, have there been any uncivil comments made during the Brevard County Commission meetings? Instead, they are researching our crime rate, our schools, our business opportunities, our infrastructure, our natural resources, and above all else, our overall potential. Madam Chair and Commissioners, the reality is that our county, our state, and our country already has a civility clause that is extremely enforceable. It's called a ballot box, where our community of nearly 600,000 citizens sit in judgment over the actions of our elected leaders. If our citizens feel that one of our commissioners or elected leaders has acted inappropriately, they can judge them for themselves.
Okay, that's all the cards I have. Commissioner Lober?
I just asked for some latitude. I can split it up if you'd like, but I wanted to, at least at first, address some items that were brought up by the crowd. Then afterward, I'll defer. I guess it looks like Mr. Tobiah chimed in. I'll defer to Mr. Tobiah, and then I may have some questions afterward. But just going through our second speaker, Mr. Stasek, spoke about growing a spine, and I think that's exactly the point. I think people need to have a spine. Free speech is about protecting views that we don't agree with. It's easy to protect those that we do agree with. So I agree with you 100%. People do need to grow a spine. As far as this preventing corruption, as you mentioned, I don't know what type of corruption there's even alleged to be to prevent. As to Mr. Nyland, who was the third speaker, he read a quote, without the context, of course, that I put on Facebook. This ordinance, I'd call your attention to the fact that this ordinance has nothing whatsoever to do with preventing anything from taking place on Facebook, so this does nothing whatsoever with respect to that. And he also mentioned, and I'm going to quote this here, I believe this is correct, dissent is the highest form of patriotism. I agree. That's why this ordinance is a horrible idea. He did mention, he talked about hypothetically whether you could call the commission any of the numerous things that he mentioned. Yeah, absolutely. Come up here, take your 3 minutes or your 5 minutes and say whatever you please. I respect that. Just as Ms. Nail mentioned, I respect your right to say whatever you want. Going on, I would call your attention to Ms. Martin, who was the fifth speaker. The first question she asked is whether we need a civility ordinance, and the answer was technically no. I would agree with that. She mentioned that this ordinance essentially, at least in part, states that commissioners may not engage in illegal conduct. No, that's not what this says. It goes way beyond that. It has nothing whatsoever to do with illegal conduct. If it's illegal, there's already a prohibition against it, and presumably some enforcement mechanism. Moving on here, I'm going to skip a few in the interest of time. Ms. Patel came up and talked about protecting constitutional rights and standing up for the First Amendment. I agree with Ms. Patel, at least on that. Absolutely, we do need to protect constitutional rights, everyone's constitutional rights. We do need to stand up for the First Amendment, everyone's First Amendment rights. Mr. Patel came up afterwards as the 11th speaker and talked about the most egregious behavior occurring outside this chamber. Let's say hypothetically that that's absolutely correct. What does this do in any way, shape, or form to address that? Absolutely nothing. Mr. Fuskus came up, and I think he had a couple excellent points, not the least of which is that flexible rules applied to differing situations often produce injustice. Phrase better than I could come up with, and that we should not overregulate, I believe he said a legislative body, and that the courts and ballot boxes are available for folks to address any concerns they have with respect to any conduct which did or didn't occur outside of the commission chambers. Mr. Tritt came up, and this is really important, I think. He mentioned there's a 30-year history of attacking the public from this commission. Why is that so important? Because what one person may consider an attack, another one may think is perfectly acceptable. So if there's a 30-year history of attacking the public from this commission, does that mean that over 30 years that we have people that should have been censured and punished for what they've done? Was it really that egregious? What was it? So moving on here. I'm not going to reiterate too much that's been said. The 21st speaker, Ms. Castellano, mentioned that there were obvious attempts to squelch any dissidents through fear. Mr. Patel did correctly mention, I have continuously and consistently criticized there being a lack of context in accusations. There is a piece of a quote totally out of context oftentimes. That's another example. I have never discouraged anyone from speaking, ever. Ever. If you want to come and speak, say whatever it is that you want, and as long as you're not, as the sheriff said, essentially threatening to blow something up or to burn a building down, I respect that. I don't have to agree with you, but I respect your right to come up here. I've had family members that were in the military. My in-laws, I have current active duty on the in-law side of my family. I respect that. And in the interest of time, I'm going to hold the rest of it. I see Mr. Tobiah has his light on. I do have more I'd like to cover, but I want to give him a chance since this is, in fact, his agenda item.
Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I only had a question for the speakers. You said hold it to the end.
Okay.
I did have one question, the only one that
You want to call
offered-
them up, and if they're willing to
Yeah, would that be
come
okay,
up-
Madam Chair?
Of course, but let me make sure they want to come up, I
Yeah,
guess.
I'm sure this individual wants to
Okay.
come up because there's a microphone. The sheriff?
Was that uncivil?
Is that considered an insult or related to county business? I don't think he's that brave.
He wants me to stand in the microphone and say I love him again. I know
Yeah.
what this is about.
Thank you. And, many folks here, I think hopefully all of us consider you an authority figure, certainly more than us sitting up here. So, and you do respect, it sounds like, the First Amendment. My question to you, would you have any concern with a citizen referring to one of your deputies as a racist?
Well, if somebody brought it to my attention that they thought one of our deputies was a racist, certainly we would look into that.
So you do consider it pretty serious when someone refers
Absolutely.
to it? Okay. Do you consider it more serious if one of your deputies referred to a citizen as a racist, or would you respect that as their First Amendment right?
Well, it's certainly their First Amendment right to say it, but in our business, we don't go say things or report things that don't have some valid nature to it.
So as a leader of a large organization, a well-respected organization, what would you do if you, one of your deputies, referred to a constituent as a racist and there was no cause for that?
We would.
Would you respect their First Amendment right, or would you take actions to alleviate, make sure that didn't happen again?
Well, with anything else that someone brings to our attention, we would thoroughly look into it, thoroughly investigate it through our staff services, and then determine if it violated any policies, any laws. And you're asking me on a random subject, but it would have to be all the details of that provided.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I was going to say, can I ask you a quick question? Only because you and I have had this discussion similar, and it wasn't related to anything in particular, but there was somebody complaining about one of your deputies, and I'm not going to say his name because he would probably like that, but you actually had to deal with something related to this, where he's got a very big opinion, and he's said some really off-color things or questionable things, or he said some things that weren't what people would consider, some would consider civil. Right. And you essentially, your hands were tied, and you at least determined that he had the right to have that opinion, even if people didn't agree with it. Because this person was criticizing another elected official, correct?
That is correct, yes, ma'am.
And you officially investigated it and realized that you couldn't.
Our staff services team thoroughly looked into it, and at the end of the day, they had the right to say what they said.
And just for the record, it was nobody up here, but.
It was not. No.
Right. Okay, I just thought that was interesting that got asked, because, and I think it's a difficult comparison because your employees are employed to enforce the law. So, I mean.
Yes, ma'am.
With the power of arrest, the power to incarcerate, the power to.
To do all of those. Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
All right, Commissioner Lober.
I have a question here for you, and then if I may, unless there's another light that comes up, I have some questions for our county attorney. Sheriff, Mr. Tobiah just asked you about what would be if one of your deputies called someone a racist and there was no cause. Let me ask you a different question. What if one of your deputies called someone a racist when that individual posted online that she didn't want to see two individuals of a particular ethnicity and gender on the ballot? Do you think that might factor into the decision as to whether or not that was appropriate?
Well, as I said, we thoroughly investigate it. We don't just take one side or the other. We look at all the facts, all of the circumstances, and then evaluate, was there any policy violation?
I appreciate it. Thank you, sir. And if I may, again, unless someone would like to jump in which case I'll happily defer to them, because I do have some lengthy questions.
Well, Commissioner Tobiah, were you finished? I know you called up the sheriff, but.
Yeah, just to follow up, do you have any special manuals or policies that your deputies must follow that, of decorum that place them above that of a regular citizen, whether it be the way they handle themselves with the uniform or anything like that?
We have policies that govern how they control or how they handle themselves. But those policies, when you're looking at somebody on their social media sites, again, if it's something that is brought to our attention, we thoroughly investigate it. But they have a right to be on the social media. They have a right to say the things that they have opinions on. If they do something that violates policy, then they're looked into and investigated.
I understand. This would only be while they're, I guess, uniformed, because this only deals with us up here. So would you be okay? This deals with the intimidation of the public. Would you be okay if any one of your deputies, while they were acting in their official capacity, used intimidation to get a desired result? I use defame.
Well, sir, I think there are some of those in the room that would argue that just our mere presence in uniform is intimidating. So I don't know that that's a valid question to ask me.
I tell you what, I would agree. Any guy that is going to come up and ask for a fee increase that's going to bust the cap certainly does have quite a bit of an intimidation, certainly with the members up here.
Yes, sir. That same guy also manages an agency that constantly responds to calls for assistance.
Are you finished?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Commissioner Lober?
Okay, and I have a question for Mr. Tobiah here.
Are you done with the sheriff?
Unless you want to hang
Does
on, Sheriff.
anybody else have questions for the sheriff while he's up here so we don't make him run
I was
anymore?
going to bring Junie, but I can't control what he says, so I just
Might
left
be
him in the
uncivil,
back.
sir.
Or who he drools on, right? Commissioner Lober?
So, Mr. Tobiah, I have a question. When you asked the sheriff a question about a hypothetical about using intimidation to get a desired result, have there been any instances that you're aware of in the past 2 years, let's say, up here on the dais, where anyone sitting at the dais has used intimidation to get a desired result? And if so, would you please, with specificity, articulate what those might have been?
Thank you. Again, this is a policy that lays out some level of decorum. My goal is very simple. We don't have rules that guys open doors for girls, but it's a common courtesy. We don't have rules that you take your hat off when you're in a building, but it's common courtesy. And I know this is going to go down a rabbit hole here when it gets into the legal realm, and I believe certainly of the members up here, certainly the elected members up here, you certainly are the smartest, not only in that realm, but probably any other. But if you feel that asking a board to intentionally intimidate constituents is just too much, my understanding is, should this pass, you have the right to free speech, and the courthouse is located, 100 yards from here, and you certainly could file both in probably circuit as well as federal court saying that your rights would have been infringed. But my question following that one up would be, as a lawyer, I looked up the Florida Bar Guidelines for Professional Conduct. It says, quote, "A lawyer always should interact with parties, counsels, witnesses, jurors, prospective jurors, court personnel, and judges with courtesy and civility, and should avoid undignified or discourteous conduct that is degrading to the court or the proceedings." So my question is, if you went into Judge Davidson's courtroom and called her a racist or a bigot, do you believe it would be violating your First Amendment rights for that conduct, or would you think that would be the basis of an ethical complaint or another action?
I'd be happy to answer that as soon as you answer the question I asked you. I asked you to give me specific examples of when anyone up here in the past 2 years intimidated anyone while acting in their official capacity. So when you go ahead and do that, I'll be happy to respond to your question.
Absolutely. When you threaten somebody's employment, and that's made mention of,
Okay, don't yell out from the audience, please.
Absolutely. The reference was made up there, whether that was made outside, but this policy doesn't deal with anything outside. This only deals with here. This policy was not commenting on any of the comments that were made online, social media. This is dealing purely with what is set up here on the board. That was made mention up here by an individual, and she mentioned that she felt intimidated by that fact. Would this seek to solve that issue? No, because it did not take place at this board.
Third time and last time I'm going to ask, would you mind responding in some way that addresses what I actually asked you, whether there's been any specific example of intimidation up here by anyone in the past 2 years while they were acting in their official capacity?
No.
Thank you. In terms of your other example, obviously it's going to be fact dependent. I will tell you that attorneys, while they're acting in their capacity as counsel, have different obligations which are imposed upon them, just as sheriffs or deputies do, just as members of the military do. And if someone's concerned about something I've done in my capacity as an attorney or a member of the Florida Bar, I know that many of the folks sitting in this room have been actively encouraging individuals to grieve me to the Florida Bar, which is the regulatory authority that essentially oversees complaints pertaining to attorneys. You're welcome to file more frivolous grievances if that's what you want to do. The nice thing is with the bar, if the grievance is frivolous, they don't even send me a copy of it, so I don't have to waste my time reading it or using it as toilet paper. So I've not gotten copies of anything, which essentially means whatever you sent in has been used as basically paper shredder fodder. So if you want to send more frivolous complaints and have more money of taxpayers going to funding the bar dealing with nonsense, go ahead and send it in. But no, it's impossible to answer your question without more specific facts. You know, do I think that it would be appropriate to call any judge a racist in court? Unless the judge made some racial pejorative reference, I would say probably not. But if the judge said something along the lines of what was said by the individual that we're mentioning, again, out of the context of the commission on Facebook, I don't know whether that would be appropriate or not. That would probably be a case of first impression if it were taken up, because I don't think any judge would have been stupid enough to say anything like that.
Okay, did you have anything else?
I do. I have some questions, and I'd ask for some latitude to go over these, mostly with the county attorney, if I may. It's going to take a few minutes.
Okay.
So, Ms. Bentley, on July 17th, Ms. Martin posted in pertinent part on Facebook, quote, "The current ordinance deals with decorum and civility in public meetings. It is just a restatement of what the law already says, and the main benefits of codifying this balance is, one, to educate the commissioners," and it goes on, and two, prevent unnecessary waste of taxpayer funds for having to defend lawsuits when commissioners unwittingly or intentionally cross the line and create a hostile environment for dissenting voices, close quote. While it would be admittedly fact-dependent, would you be surprised to see potentially meritorious lawsuits filed against the county based upon the enforcement of the proposed ordinance as it's written?
The proposal addresses speech. Speech entails First Amendment issues. When you're dealing with First Amendment issues, there is always a balancing test. And so it's the application of the rule to the facts that can produce litigation. Yes.
So there's a potential for legal challenges on any ordinance, is there not?
Yes.
Do you believe there's a greater likelihood of lawsuits resulting from this specific ordinance than from other ordinances, due at least in part to the fact that it deals with restricting speech?
It's a balancing test, so it probably will lead to more litigation than some other ordinances. We have ordinances litigated every day.
I appreciate that. You can't say whether the county would be successful in defending against these potential challenges, can you?
No, that'll be a fact-dependent issue.
Is it accurate, as Ms. Martin has stated in writing, that the current ordinance simply restates, quote, what the law already says, close quote?
Not exactly, because this proposal includes censure provisions that don't exist already.
So that's a no.
Correct.
I appreciate that. The truth is that the proposed ordinance goes beyond the existing law, does it not?
It adds provisions, yes.
You'd agree that the proposed ordinance restricts speech beyond what's currently in place, at least insofar as it more severely penalizes speakers found in violation, would you not?
It provides censure provisions.
Ms. Martin got up here a little bit ago and stated that this ordinance prohibits illegal conduct. Is that what this does?
It is proposed to address an orderly and efficient board meeting. And that's already addressed in Robert's rules and in your rules of procedure.
Thank you. Well, I understand that your office may well have worked on the 2017, I believe it was, proposal that was referenced. Understanding full well that you likely reviewed the current ordinance, neither you nor anyone in your office wrote this specific proposed ordinance, did they?
No, we did do the draft in 2017.
I appreciate that. Now, in terms of the agenda item, this particular item, it's not a staff-driven item to your knowledge, is it?
No.
Assuming you were at some point presented with such an item that you didn't draft and you didn't necessarily approve of or agree with, your goal as county attorney would have been to make suggestions to essentially make it as legal as possible. Am I correct?
Correct.
Nonetheless, you couldn't force any such suggestion or suggestions on the commissioner who asked for your input, could you?
No.
I have some questions for you at this point dealing with constitutionality and potential civil liability. This past week, I provided you with copies of some federal case law, did I not?
Yes.
Have you had a chance to review the opinion in the federal case Norse versus City of Santa Cruz?
Yes.
Now, that case dealt with the constitutionality of the enforcement of, quote, rules of decorum, close quote, promulgated by a city council, did it not?
Yes.
Am I correct in stating that the facts in the Norse case dealt with the First Amendment challenge to the enforcement of those rules of decorum which were promulgated by a local governmental body?
Yes.
Isn't it true that the Norse case stands, at least in part, for the proposition that regulation of speech by a local governmental body must not only be, quote, viewpoint neutral, close quote, but that it also must be, quote, enforced that way, close quote, in order to be lawful?
That language is in the case, yes.
So the Norse case goes on and it states that the, quote, usual rule, close quote, is that governmental bodies may not prescribe the form or content of individual expression. Is that right?
Yes.
There exists case law indicating that, quote, an undifferentiated fear or apprehension of disturbance is not enough to overcome the right to freedom of expression, close quote. Does there not?
That language is in the case.
Well, there is ongoing litigation right now over what constitutes an actual disturbance. The federal court system has made it clear that the required threshold is one of actually disturbing or impeding a meeting, has it not?
That's what was at issue in the Norse case.
Can we do anything about that echo?
I think it's just Eden.
No. Is she just echoing?
I guess you're meant to sound scarier over there.
It is imposing.
Maybe if I push it away.
Oh, is it? Because up here, with the feedback, we can't hear it, but
I'm sorry. We'll just do the best we can, I guess.
I'm sure
I'll
they're
stay
aware
farther
because they're
back.
upstairs watching, so.
So
Could you
there-
just fix the mics, please?
There exists case law indicating that it's prohibited to penalize a speaker in the instant case by ejecting a meeting attendee for constructive disruption, technical disruption, virtual disruption, nunc-pro-tunc disruption, or imaginary disruption, does there not?
That language is in the case, yes.
Is there a clear, bright line where these various types of disruption become actual disruption, or is this reliant upon a fact-dependent analysis?
It's a fact-dependent analysis.
Just to be perfectly clear, there is no bright line rule.
No, First Amendment cases involve a balancing test, which inherently is not a bright line.
Thank you. Now, let's talk about an example that most folks would likely think could be lawfully prohibited. Even abhorrent conduct, such as one making a Nazi salute during a local governmental meeting, is in itself.
They're having a hard time hearing out there.
Are they?
I don't know if we should take a break. I don't want to interrupt the issue, but if the public can't hear us speak on it, it's sort of ironic that it's this issue and the public can't hear us talk about it. You can hear now? Okay, because I was going to say, I was
Okay.
getting up here that they weren't hearing, so, but you can hear now.
Your mic might not be on, Madam Chair.
Okay.
It is.
It
That's what it
looks like
says.
it's all on.
That's one interruption I don't mind. If you can't hear us, please let us know, because I'm up here doing hand gestures with Phil.
So I guess we'll just pick up where we were. All right.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Conduct, that's all right. Even abhorrent conduct, such as one making a Nazi salute during a local governmental meeting, is in itself legally insufficient to justify kicking that individual out of the meeting. Isn't that correct?
That was the ruling in the Norse case. Can you
So-
hear me?
Is that better?
Is it reverberating now? Okay, all right. That was the ruling in the Norse case.
So with that said, regulations must be tailored narrowly to serve a significant government interest for content-neutral regulation. Is that right?
That is the language of the case law, yes.
And regulation of content itself requires a higher threshold, a compelling government interest. Is that right?
Correct.
So I'd like to call your attention for a moment to the U.S. Supreme Court case of Cohen v. California. The U.S. Supreme Court held that, quote, the mere presumed presence of unwitting listeners or viewers does not serve automatically to justify curtailing all speech capable of giving offense, close quote. Does that match your understanding?
That language is in the case, yes.
So the U.S. Supreme Court also expressed serious concern that a broad view of any authority to limit speech, quote, would effectively empower a majority to silence dissidents simply as a matter of personal predilections, close quote. Is that right?
That language is in the case, yes.
So a recent news article indicated Mr. Tobiah proposed disallowing any speaker from labeling another individual, and I quote, pejoratively, including but not limited to applying labels such as racist, bigot, sexist, criminal, or evil. While these words appear to have been removed in the revision now being considered, would you agree that this initial proposal by Mr. Tobiah and Ms. Martin would be objectively unconstitutional because, with rare exception, as the sheriff's mentioned, it's impermissible to regulate specific words?
Yes, we recommended removal of that language.
So going back to the Cohen case, concern was expressed that, quote, governments might soon seize upon the censorship of particular words as a convenient guise for banning the expression of unpopular views, close quote. Is that correct?
That is a quote from the case, yes.
Well, the specific language of the proposal has changed over the past several days. If the proposal were passed as it's currently worded, you would agree that the manner in which this proposed ordinance is applied may well result in the county having to expend taxpayer funds fighting First Amendment challenges, would you not?
There could be as-applied questions which could lead to litigation, as with all ordinances, yes.
Do you believe that the operative portions of this particular ordinance are likely to be subjectively interpreted and or applied by individual commissioners?
Well, the board has to make a determination, and you always have this situation where you have the law, the rule, the facts, and the application of the facts of the law to the facts. We always have that in every
So
case.
Essentially, this is no different in that it does require subjectivity.
It does require application of an analysis, yes.
Now, if the ordinance were passed as it's currently worded, would you have any concerns about the constitutionality of how the ordinance may be applied either by future or even by present commissioners?
I think that's what will be tested.
And what do you mean by tested?
Well, that's how First Amendment cases operate. If you have a content-neutral provision, it can still be misapplied in the future, and that would be the challenge that you would see. I think this is facially constitutional, but the application of the law in the future would be the question.
Now, let me ask you an example here. Is it not entirely possible that a commissioner could be punished under the proposed ordinance for merely defending himself or herself by responding to defamatory comments made during public comment?
If the board found that that was interrupting it was not serving a legitimate public purpose under the ordinance, yes.
Which is possible as the ordinance is drafted.
Possible, yes.
Do you believe that the calling of a point of order was or is contemplated by the ordinance?
There's a reference to the point of order, yes, in the censure section.
Given that, well, the text of the proposed ordinance talks about a speaker failing, quote, to come to order, close quote. The fact is that there's no explicit requirement in the proposed ordinance that a point of order be called or a speaker be warned. Isn't that right?
It is not explicit, no.
Now, this next one is critically important. Absent reviewing line by line minutes from prior commission meetings, during the preceding 2 years, I'll use the same time frame as Mr. Tobiah used, that I used with the question to him, has there been any specific conduct by any commissioner or commissioners which stands out in your mind in which, had this proposal actually been in effect, that conduct would have been clearly barred as a result of the ordinance?
Well, I don't think I've been at all of the meetings for the last 2 years, but even if I had been, that's a hypothetical situation. If an ordinance had been in place and what the members of the board, which they've been different over the last 2 years, what they would have done, I can't answer that question.
So I would presume, based upon that, then you can't say that this would necessarily have accomplished anything in the past couple of years.
I don't know. That would.
Now, is it clear where the line is drawn in terms of which particular commentary is acceptable and which is unacceptable within the proposed ordinance?
It's going to be a board decision based on the facts presented.
Now, if I give you a particular and fact-specific hypothetical fact pattern, are you able to tell me to a reasonable degree of legal certainty whether the county would be subject to liability for enforcement under those circumstances?
It's going to be fact-dependent. I would have to wait and see what happened in the situation that arose.
Would you agree that there are a number of gray areas in which, in all likelihood, the answer may not be known?
Yes.
Now, judges are somewhat different in their views of facts, including Judge Davidson, and it's impossible to predict whether which particular judge would be assigned to a case prior to suit being filed. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
I want to go and shift a little bit more toward potential liability exposure here. You can't tell me whether commissioners could or would, as a result of enforcing this particular ordinance, be subject to individual liability for depriving someone of civil rights under U.S. Code Chapter 1983, could you?
Probably not. 1983 is the provision that is used in the First Amendment cases. This proposal, however, doesn't seem to provide a punishment or censure that involves the limitation of the kinds of rights that lead to the 1983 judgments. This isn't ejectment. This isn't a false arrest. This is a censure that relates to board actions at a later date, which I don't think is in the protected territory, but there are no cases on that.
So essentially, it's an area where the case law isn't settled, and this would be a case of first impression?
Correct.
You would agree that the enforcement of this proposed ordinance is necessarily tempered by First Amendment rights, would you not?
Yes.
Despite how it's been presented, could the misapplication of this proposed ordinance or the fear of how it might actually be applied serve to chill free speech?
I think that's up to the board members.
Is it your hope that this ordinance isn't misapplied?
Of course.
In addition to concerns regarding what constitutes a, quote, disruption, close quote, I'm additionally concerned that what constitutes government activity or a related purpose may come into question. Is there a bright line rule regarding that?
No.
Could you see the potential application of this ordinance and everything that would entail, resulting in lengthy discussions extending our already long, oftentimes 6.5-hour meetings?
It's possible. That would be up to the board.
So knowing the current composition of the commission, how likely is it that such discussions will be a quick 5 minutes? That's okay. I'm not going to push that one. That would be uncivil of me. Should the board for any reason be inclined to adopt a resolution of this sort, and I hope that's not the case, would it not be best practice to allow your office to address the constitutionality questions in the form of a written memorandum?
We could do that.
And I believe Ms. Martin even came up here and made reference to the fact that she was encouraging staff to look at this and report back, which it doesn't appear to have been done at this point. Another question for you. Have you been asked by any commissioner to prepare any such memo on the constitutionality of what's been proposed?
No.
All right, I'm through with the questions, but I do have some comments I have for my commissioners, fellow commissioners up here. And I'll keep these much briefer than the questions to Ms. Bentley, if that's all right.
Okay. Commissioner Pritchett?
If you'd like to finish, ma'am, it'd be okay. Did you want him to finish first?
Oh, I thought you said you
I
wanted
can
to
go
on.
after her with as far as my comments for the commissioners. I'm happy to defer at this point.
Okay, Commissioner Pritchett?
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Nye, I can't remember the Superman thing you mentioned because I'm an Avenger girl, but I thought you kind of missed something in there. I think with that little word you used, I think the thing that got me today is somebody actually saying Commissioner Tobiah was a Democrat. So, yeah. Because I think sometimes Commissioner Tobiah gives me a little bit of a hard time with some comments I make, but I just got kind of tickled with that came through and that you didn't catch that one. Sheriff, you brought up a good point. You know, if we do this, it's trying to figure out who decides what, you know, who's making the decision on this. Please understand this. I really believe in civility. And the other place that I do work, and no apologies for that, is I work at a church, and where we work, you know, if you even cuss there, you're out. So, you know, how are we going to line this up? I mean, if I get to be queen and we're going to all make it my rules, you know, it's going to be, you know, the nice county, but I can't get away with that. So everybody's got different opinions and ideas on what's okay and what's not. Not that I don't think some things have probably crossed the line of where anything should go, and I believe we're starting to make changes in that. I see a lot of hope moving forward, but here's a thought with this. So everybody agrees we need to have civility, of course, and I can't imagine somebody standing up saying I don't agree with civility, but how are we going to get to that path? Well, we might be able to help get there in this place, and pretty much it's not too bad. There's been a few times we've had some problems, and I think what we're going to need to do is abide more by the Roberts Rules of Order. We talk over the chair many times, and we shouldn't, and we need to do better than that. Questions need to be directed to the chair. We need to get back into that format and, you know, respect people's rights to have free speech and be able to say what you want to say without being booed or applauded when you're speaking. I mean, people should be allowed to say what they're saying. Not that, as the sheriff mentioned, some things just shouldn't be said. You have the freedom to say it, but you also have the freedom to pay the penalty for what you said. So, you know, we're going to have to weigh that up here moving forward. I can't control social media. It's a mess. I don't know how you guys get on it so much and do the things you do. My personal thing with my staff, they're not allowed to do any politics on it. It's our personal policy. They can, you know, say, hey, downtown we're having a big street party or something, but we don't do politics as a staff. You can't get anything accomplished there. Plus, it's not open to everybody, so it's really not free speech and free comment. So we've put that into place, and that's something I'm throwing out for the commissioners here that maybe we should implement ourselves so that the public has an ability to come here, speak on things, and we're not doing things out there that are getting published. Since I have been watching county meetings, which is a long time, I wanted to learn the position before I ran for it, and even the last year and a half, this has always been an issue. A year and a half ago, we had some stuff going on where the public was showing up because some things commissioners were saying and doing. You should see some of these election cards that go out on other commissioners from other commissioners. I mean, this is not a new thing. It's out there. And, you know, it's the freedom of speech things. I hope I don't get some of those slammed on me next time. I won't do it, but people have the freedom to do it. I mean, Commissioner Smith, you look kind of funny with the green hair when it came out, sir, when you were running last time. So is it okay to do these things? I don't think so. I just don't think it should be done. In my personal policy, I don't vote for anybody that slams somebody else. I won't vote for anybody who has to make somebody else worse to make themselves better. That's just my personal thing. But I can't implement that everywhere because everybody's got a freedom to say. And Sheriff, like you said, who's going to be the judge of these things? And I'm mature enough to know that that shouldn't be me because I'm in the position of making policy and not judging those types of items. Now, I got to tell you, I'm worn with all this, so I understand Commissioner Tobiah bringing something forward and Ms. Mel bringing something forward because this is wearing. And I personally don't want to keep doing these things in a county boardroom. I want to do county business. And this has taken hours and hours and hours. And I can't imagine the cost on the staff and all of us trying to do this. So I do want to get to a place to where we're not doing this anymore. So I would just ask that we would respect Robert's Rules of Order here. And personally, I would just ask the commissioners if we would just, make an agreement here that we're not going to be doing politics on social media. It's just not the format to do it. I think this is a better place, and I would just ask that, and I think a lot of these items would be solved, and that we would just kind of do a self-rule on ourselves, because again, Robert's Rules of Order covers this. If I'm going to start using the word point of order a little bit more, I'm getting more used to it. I'm probably going to throw that out every once in a while. Point of order used to be my favorite term at Titusville. They knew I was a point of order lady. So I think there's some things we can do with that, but I think I hear all you guys, and I respect all your opinions. I do, and I listen to them. But I think moving forward, that I think we need to start enforcing our policy if that's what we need to do as far as the commission chambers. But like the sheriff had also pointed out, and Mr. Nye and Mr. White, you said also, eventually things do end up where they need to be as far as what the public wants and needs, and that I have to respect. Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Tobiah?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And these questions are, with your latitude, to Ms. Bentley. There are only two of them. Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Lover brought up a lot of potential legal issues that could happen. I trust they're all correct. They're certainly over my limited intellect. My one question is this. For all this to happen, my rudimentary understanding is there would need to be an individual that would have standing. Who would be the only individuals to have standing in any of these cases?
The individual censured.
My understanding that would be one of the 5 members up here.
Correct.
Okay. And then final question, do you feel comfortable that this, in your words, factual constitutional ordinance could be defended in good faith?
Yes, I believe it's facially constitutional.
Thank you.
Commissioner Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, isn't this fun?
Is that what we're calling it?
Yeah, we're calling it fun, I guess, by some definition. The reference Commissioner Pritchett made with regard to my green hair, if most of you don't, I would guess most of you don't follow elections that closely, so I'll just give you a little idea what that was about. I don't know which specific thing you're talking about, but in the last election, my opponent and people that supported her did everything they could to demean me, trash me, lie about me, whatever other adjective or verbs that you want to use. So that's what she was referring to. It wasn't me that had green hair. It was one of my opponents that tried to make me look bad. So that's that. And we have a civility pledge up there, and that's courtesy of Ms. Pritchett when she was chair. And we see how good that works. So where do we go from here? As has been mentioned, I brought up a similar civility ordinance. I sat down with Mr. Knox, who was here a couple of years ago, for comments that Commissioner Tobiah had made regarding Carol McCormick and calling her a criminal, and some other things that I didn't care much for, and thought, we have to do something about this. And I will mention, by the way, the Ethics Commission has exonerated Mayor Carol McCormick of any criminal wrongdoing, so she's not a criminal. But I thought better of that policy because I thought, you know what, we have Robert's Rules of Order, and if somebody wants to be disparaging and whatever, dismissive of the public or fellow commissioners, they really kind of do that at their own peril. As someone mentioned, we have a ballot box, so that's in place. But you kind of wonder as you sit up here, we have to do something because this can't go on. We've just spent, and I will say wasted, the better part of 2 hours on this issue. I've been on this board for 5.5 years, I guess, and before Commissioner Lober took office, our meetings were 3 to 4 hours long, and we got a lot of work done, and we just dealt with business. Since Mr. Lober's been in office, we spend an awful lot of time on Mr. Lober and topics that come up that don't have anything to do with county business. And so we wind up with 5 and 6 hour meetings. And I sit up here and look at the ceiling a lot and twiddle my thumbs. So what do we do about this? Brevard County has an awful lot going for it, right? We've got the spaceport, we've got the zoo, we have the beaches, we have USSSA bringing people in here. We have hundreds of thousands of people visiting our county. We've got a very special place. We even have a girl that played on the U.S. Soccer team, the World Cup, from Satellite Beach. But nationally, we're known for discouraging remarks that Commissioner Lober is making. He made the papers in Washington, D.C. So we should be talking about positive things in Brevard County, and we have an awful lot of positive, and I've just enumerated a few. So the question becomes, what do we do about Mr. Lober? Well, personally, I think that we have policies in place, and I'm going to introduce another policy to my fellow commissioners. I sat down with Eden. Her and her people came up with a lot of this wording, and I think it just gives us direction that we can follow, and I'm going to hand these out. In fact, I might as well do it now. We get one, too. But thank you. We have to make some decision on what we're going to do, whether we do nothing, if we just rely on our commissioner our chairwoman, to run the meetings efficiently so that we don't go down these bunny trails all the time and we just stick to county business. That's up to us to decide. And I think that, particularly, I think that's the best way to handle this. Commissioner Lober was duly elected. If he wants to say what he wants to say on Facebook, abhorrent as I think some of the things that he says are, that's on him. But unfortunately, it reflects on all of the commissioners because people out in the community, they don't differentiate between him and the rest of us. Because when I go out in the community and I'm in Publix or wherever, people come up and say, what's wrong with that commission? What is wrong with the commission? So I say again, we have to do something, but what do? I think what we do is tighten up the rules that we have, and if my fellow commissioners think that we should censure someone because they reflect badly on us, I've heard it said that, well, he can do anything he wants on his own time. That's absolutely true, but I will counter that being a commissioner, he is always a commissioner. When he steps down from being a commissioner, he can say anything he wants on social media, and nobody's really going to care. But because he's got that title, people care. So that's what I say as far as he is entitled to say what he wants, but he's also entitled to suffer the consequences. But the consequences are coming down on us as well. So that's my issue. So I said an awful lot, but I don't know if I got through what I was trying to say.
Commissioner Lober?
Now, Commissioner Smith, do you think it's appropriate, and would you be willing to censure a commissioner who called a duly elected state representative short-sighted and long-winded in his capacity as a commissioner?
Not if it was true. And it was true, and it's still true.
So that's a subjective matter now, is it not?
Yes.
But you would be willing to censure someone who called out an individual who made a blatantly racist and sexist post?
I wouldn't call you out for that. No, I wouldn't censure you for that. But I would censure you for trying to intimidate somebody's employer. That's totally out of bounds.
I agree with you, and I'd like to know which employer I supposedly intimidated, because we did have someone come up here who lied about her employment, who also, on the record at the last meeting, lied about me being opposition to Ms. Martin at some point. And that individual wasn't intimidated. That individual used profanity against me in a manner that was, excuse you.
Okay.
Excuse you. That's what we're talking about, civility. We want to hear the views we want to hear, but not those that we don't. I understand full well. Thank you. Now, I'm just going to go on. That's not worth wasting the time on. I'm going to read a quote from Scott Ellis here that he put on Facebook, and I'm going to read it verbatim. The entire positive momentum of the new county commission has been ground to a halt, arguing over nothing. The only things missing in this ordinance are trigger warnings and safe spaces. Now, to my fellow commissioners, given that this proposed ordinance can only serve to unconstitutionally be applied, I'm not worried about the constitutionality of it facially. It's the application of it that I have constitutional concerns and with which I address Ms. Bentley. Given that it can only serve to unconstitutionally restrict speech and therefore result in civil liability for the county and potentially individual commissioners, it's dangerous. In reality, the proposed ordinance has little to do with civility in meetings, and thankfully that's come out today. Its greatest champions, including Ms. Martin and Mr. Tobiah, have been quoted so as to indicate that the next step is restricting free speech outside of the county commission chambers. That's in Florida today, that's on Facebook, that's everywhere. For those who believe elected officials should be held to a higher standard outside of commission chambers, what about my Second Amendment right to carry a firearm? If my First Amendment rights as a private citizen can be restricted, can my Second Amendment rights also be restricted? What about my Fifth Amendment right? What about others? If they're going to come after me first, which group are they going to go after next? Maybe it may not be a big issue to you if it doesn't affect you yet, but it's going to be a huge issue when it starts to be applied the other way around. Now, given that this proposed ordinance, had it been in effect 2 years ago, wouldn't necessarily have prohibited anything that's occurred up here, why do we need it? Given that this proposed ordinance is so ungodly subjective as to be subject to the whims of particular commissioners, what good can it do? Of particular concern, our county attorney hopes that this proposed ordinance will not be misapplied, and I commend her for hoping that, but she wouldn't have to hope it wasn't misapplied or that it won't be misapplied if it were drafted and if it weren't drafted in a manner that is so incredibly vague and so incredibly subjective in its application. Now, this strikes me as a feel-good proposal designed to essentially satisfy an angry mob that doesn't represent the majority of the community. You know, these are folks that represent a small subset. It will unquestionably lead to lawsuits, and the county may well lose those lawsuits, costing taxpayers not only their freedoms, but actual money. There are going to be lawsuits, or there are ongoing lawsuits right now dealing with what constitutes a disruption. We don't even know what the courts are going to rule in terms of those suits yet. Yet there's a push, despite this unsettled case law, this huge area of unsettled case law, to adopt an ordinance that's going to put us right in the middle of that fray and cost us money. We run the very real risk of trampling one of the most cherished freedoms and one of the most cherished rights that's been at the very core of American freedom for hundreds of years, and being sued for doing it, costing taxpayers money. Many of those who came to speak today supporting the measure are the least civil of all speakers to come before the commission. Anything I may have even thought pales in comparison to what they've written and what they've said. If this is passed, don't be surprised to see our Constitution turned into essentially one-ply toilet paper the very first time it's applied. This is perhaps the least patriotic, least libertarian, and least conservative item I have ever seen proposed by any official in the history of the county. You know, and I was kind of debating whether to find it funny or to be horrified that there was essentially an offer to teach Mr. Tobiah the secret handshake with the other party. But that's very telling. This isn't merely dangerous. This is an existential threat to our liberties as it opens the door for more. And we've already heard they're going to go for more. It's not merely a hypothetical. We've already been told that there will be that push for additional restrictions outside the county commission chambers. Then what after that? Well, I would ask my colleagues to vote against this for a variety of reasons, many of which I've already covered and many of which I'm sure they're already well versed in. If there is any inclination, and I hope that's not the case, to support this, I'd at a dead minimum ask that it be tabled pending the drafting and dissemination of a memo by our county attorney's office addressing the application, the constitutionality of the application of this particular item. Otherwise, we're going to spend taxpayer dollars defending against having trampled on folks' rights.
Any other discussion before I speak, or? Okay. I think this is a policy in search of a problem. I mean, aside from the fact that we have Robert's Rule of Order and we do our best to maintain it, I mean, there's always dissent up here. I mean, I'm accountable to the people that vote either to elect me or to not elect me in office. And while I think it's cute that we want to be accountable to each other, and I would hope, and I say hope, I hope that we're respectful to one another up here. Ultimately, you know, I don't want to be at the mercy of whether or not they decide they agree with my policy or they agree with whether or not my items have to do with county business. There's too much subjectivity here, and I don't feel comfortable supporting something based on somebody else's ethical, moral, or pejoratively whether or not, you know, they decide it's county business or worthy of discussion. So I think this is dangerous. I think it's very telling when the person that helped craft the ordinance with Commissioner Tobiah had said this is not political, this is apolitical, red, blue, whatever, and then in the second sentence says that she's putting on her Democratic hat and asking us not to pass it because it will work for the Democrats' favor. That should tell you where this is being driven from. Commissioner Lober, I don't condone what he does on his own time on social media. Would I have said it? No. But he's accountable to his voters. I mean, there are things in place to remedy his behavior. And there's an ethics commission. If someone deems that they've got cause to file an ethics complaint, do it. If he violates the law, then he's accountable for that as well. Up here, I'm not his judge and jury. I'm not his mother. And I'm not going to pretend to be. I mean, I think that if we try to subjectively decide on whether or not somebody's behavior is acceptable, that puts us in a rough position. And who's going to defend if there's a censure? If there is a censure up here based on this new crazy policy, what if I use Commissioner Lober as the example because obviously he's the subject. If he decides to challenge the censure, is the county going to be responsible for those legal fees? I mean, would we be obligated to be responsible for those legal fees based on a policy that we put in place? Probably. I mean, I'm sure he's an attorney. He would know how to put that, how to word that correctly in a lawsuit, or at least to have a legal standing on whether or not the county should be responsible. You know, we're all adults. And again, we're all accountable to our voters. I've seen people not get reelected based on their behavior. I've seen people do wonderful things and get overwhelmingly reelected. I've seen commissions have passed, do some really vicious things on this very dais, and nobody said anything. Nobody said anything. The public didn't come out and cry, this person's being mistreated, because they were ignored, the few that did. So, and for I find it kind of funny that the commissioner that brings this forward has said some pretty horrible things to another commissioner in the past, and nobody said anything either. Because at least at the time, whether you agreed with him or not, it was his right to say it. And it was up to the commission then to, if they wanted to disagree with it, but they didn't have the right to censure him. And if, you know, we talk about censure, and everybody says, well, if you just censured him, this would go away. No, it wouldn't. Not when the motivating factor was what Commissioner Lober was doing on his own time. He's always a commissioner. He's always accountable to the people that elected him. But at the same time, he didn't violate the law. I don't like what he said. A lot of people don't like what he said, but he didn't violate the law. And if you want to file an ethics complaint, please do it. But I'm not going to play mommy up here because someone doesn't like Mr. Lober. So I won't be supporting this. I think that this is like in search of a problem we don't need. Commissioner Pritchett?
Yes, ma'am. I just want to make one comment. I agree with you completely. But I look at Commissioner Smith's handout, and I think this is just tightening up policy with Robert's Rules of Order. So I think this is actually pretty good, talking about running everything through you. And it's talking about if we bring presentations, you should view it first before we even bring a presentation. When I was chairing, I had one commissioner send something in that was personal, and I sent it back and said no, and it wasn't put into the agenda. So I think that we as a commission, I know that Commissioner Lober, you're new, you're learning some of this stuff, but we really need to respect you chairing and allow you to do this. And I think this is going to solve almost 100% of our problems here in the dais, and as we move forward. And I agree with you totally out there. You know, if you're not breaking the law, we can't do anything. I don't want to do anything with it. I mean, people have a right to say what they say. There's always cause and effect. So that's all I have to say, ma'am.
Commissioner Tobiah?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think it's quite clear that a majority of this board is not in favor of this policy. And
Policy I am.
or sorry, this ordinance. We'll get to policy in a minute. I apologize. In this ordinance, and I respect the will of the board, and I certainly don't want to put anyone in a position where they on this where they have to vote up or down as they move forward. So what I'm going to it's very clear. If anyone else wants to bring this up in the future, I certainly will be a thumbs up on it. On the policy, though, the policy is a bit troubling to me for a number of reasons. The ordinance that I was looking at controlling the behavior of a board that went sideways. The policy doesn't deal with the behavior of the board. It deals, and the public hasn't seen this, it only deals with the behavior of the audience. And I respect the audience. I've been called some, man, I guess I've never been called anything worse than a socialist, but I respect people's right to be able to do that. Absolutely, utterly, and totally. In here, there are some, and the public has not yet seen this, but there are some things that are troubling to me. For instance, the public should get a copy of this. You're cutting 5 minutes of speech down to 3 minutes. While there may be some concerns for long meetings here, I don't think the blame should be anyone in the audience. I think everyone should have the opportunity. It's kind of daunting to get up there and speak on television and all that good nonsense. So I don't think we should take a ordinance that looks at maintaining decorum of the board and turn it into a policy that turns into controlling the audience. And so I don't think they're all conjoined on that. I would hope that we would at least give the audience, the public, the ability to see this before we voted on it. But if you look,
we're not voting on it. I just wanted everybody to have it. And then I'm seeking, that's what I'm doing. I'm seeking
because
your
of sunshine, of course. Yeah, this is very difficult because we can't, we use the same attorney, but we don't have the ability to go back and forth. Many of these were many of this were ideas that I had in my first draft, but then pulled out to separate those. So I would be absolutely amenable to looking at them. I certainly, though, would not want to decrease the participation of the audience, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Pritchett?
Yeah, Commissioner Tobiah, I know this has been a long day, but actually these things in here are things we've already been doing. We voted on 2 years ago to do. We moved public comment to 3 minutes already. And all these items we've already done except for quasi-judicial. So he was just tightening up policy on that. Just so you guys know, there's nothing put in here that was different. The only thing that was added in here to tighten up policy as far as Robert Rules of Order is that we wouldn't get off on rabbit trails with the people that come up and talk unless we go through the chair. So like if you come up and you're making a comment, we're not allowed to just start bantering with you. That's going to have to go through the chair, which will protect you. And I think that's something we probably need to do a little better on because I think that's been a problem we need it to address. And then it also says that we don't get those conversations going with individual commissioners. It doesn't end well, so it's better to go through the chair so everybody can have freedom of speech and have public comment. And that's really what Commissioner Smith did here. He just tightened up a little part there we probably should have rewrote 2 years ago when we changed it. And then he just tightened up the part about how we interact with the public from up here, which is, I think, most of our problems here in the chambers.
Commissioner Lober?
Okay, hopefully I think it's working. All right. No, just at first blush, obviously. No, it's okay. Obviously, this is the first time I've seen this, so there may be other concerns, but looking at Section 4, subsection, it looks like the old F, the new G, so G is in golf. My only concern with that is I think there needs to be, if that's in there, which is potentially good, that the chair shall liberally permit response to inaccurate information, because my concern, again, goes back to limiting anyone's ability to express themselves. And I'm fine having to go through the chair, but I think that there needs to be something incentivizing the chair, suggesting that it's incumbent upon the chair to allow inaccurate information to be rebutted. And if that's in there, there's nothing that stands out to me, at least at first blush, that would be a deal breaker in here, and I'd be inclined to support this in all likelihood.
Yeah. Commissioner Tobiah, the reason why I was trying to get your attention is I don't think your button's working. I can see you pressing, but it's not coming up.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Maybe he's hitting the wrong button.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'm confused right now. As far as the public policy on Section D, when I was in the legislature, a strike through generally means that's what the policy is right now, and a strike through means we're getting rid of it. An underline means that's what's added. I don't know if that's different here. Is that the same policy?
It is the same.
So in other words, in fact, I was correct and not the other commissioner, where the policy is that they have five minutes in policy right now. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, under
So
this policy,
okay.
but there's a resolution with board procedures, and there's some confusion between when you put in a card for a board item versus the public comments section that's designated G and K on your agenda. And there have been multiple chairs who have moved to limit the agenda items to 3 minutes. So it's gone back and forth. So this was an effort to pull everything together and make it the same. If you want a different time frame, that's easily done.
So we have one policy. We have a policy saying one thing and a resolution saying
Yes.
something else.
Yes. 5-0 vote. But, right, and the board always has the ability to lengthen or shorten. That's already been in there.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Lober?
I was just going to say, in terms of the duration, I don't care if it's 3 minutes or 5 minutes, or we split the difference and say it's 4 minutes. I'm not as concerned about the length of time, but I do have a concern that if there are differing times based upon someone coming before the board in public comment versus an agenda item, it's just going to encourage those folks to essentially game the system to go to whichever they have a greater allotment of time for. So I don't care if it's 3 or 5, as I said, but I think we really ought to standardize it at 1 or the other, or some other number that people want to see.
I think we've always done 5 minutes for quasi-judicial, because a lot of times people will leave. I mean, if you see from some of our long meetings, and I have another stack for another item on here, what will end up happening is people can't sit here for 7 hours. So the 3 minutes isn't to stifle discussion, it's to give people a chance to speak before they have to go home or pick up their children, or it's in the interest of making sure they get a chance to speak. Otherwise, I've got a bunch of cards, names I'm calling out, and they've had to leave. So it's out of respect for them, and just out of, the knowledge and history of having done this once or twice a few years ago. But a lot of these policy things that Mr. Smith or Commissioner Smith brought forward are just language clarification. I think I made my position pretty clear. I don't want to do anything that's going to stifle debate, stifle discussion, stifle the public or commission or otherwise. So if you bring something forward and it meets that criteria, where I don't believe that it's more just to make sure the meeting is in order, then I don't have a problem with it. But I don't want to even give the perception of doing anything that's going to stifle open and free debate. Okay, so Commissioner Tobiah, are you just not going to move forward with the legislative intent? Was that the?
Yes, Madam Chair, it's very clear that the 3 votes, in fact, probably 2 votes aren't on this one. And again, I don't want to put anyone in the position to have to vote on the record for this one, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Moving right along.
Moving along. Does anybody need a break?
Up to you.
Commissioner Smith, you want to take 5?
No, I'm good.
Okay. You want to take 5? Sure. Okay. We're going to take a quick break.